Good morning, everyone. I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C., and I am joined today by members of my public safety team, the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro, and leaders and advocates who have been on the front lines of supporting survivors of domestic violence, including Jennifer Porter, who is our director of the district's Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants. And I want to acknowledge Jennifer for her tremendous leadership in our public safety cluster, working with victims of crime. This week is National Crime Victims' Rights Week, and today we are announcing new legislation that will strengthen protection for victims of domestic violence. I want to acknowledge and thank Judge Pirro for her focus on victims of crime in the District of Columbia and her focus on making sure that we're doing all that we can to protect victims and deter domestic violence in our communities. When we talk about making sure every DC resident feels safe, it has to include making sure people are safe in their own homes. Unfortunately, even as we have experienced decreases in violent crime across all categories, we have experienced some troubling increases in crime that are domestic violence related. The chief will speak more about those statistics. We know that all crime is unacceptable and all violence is unacceptable, but there is something particularly devastating about violence between people inflicted by people closest to them. So today we're announcing legislation we've been working on for some time, Protecting Victims Act of 2026. This legislation is about making sure that survivors are protected and that their safety and privacy are respected. It also is about making sure that when someone needs help, they can trust that help will be there, and that when someone breaks the law, there are clear and consistent consequences. It builds on the work that we have done in my administration. What we moved in 2019, the Sexual Assault Victims' Rights Act, also referred to as SAVRA, of 2019, 2022, and 2023. We also opened 2 new domestic violence shelters, including the district's first 24/7 domestic violence shelter. So you'll hear more details from Judge Pirro and Chief Carroll about how this legislation will work in practice. But here are the goals: strengthen enforcement of court orders to protect victims, strengthen pretrial detention of domestic violence offenders, enhance accountability for domestic violence offenders, and protect victim and survivor privacy. So with that, I'm going to turn to Judge Pirro, followed by Chief Carroll, and then you will hear from Natalia Otero from DC Safe. Thank you. Judge.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bowser. And let me just say at the outset that the cooperation and the relationship between the United States Attorney's Office and the mayor and the Metropolitan Police Department is one that I am extremely proud of as someone who has been in this lane for well over 3 decades. So thank you very much, Mayor, for the work that you're doing. Let me start by saying that physical violence occurs between members of the same family more often than it does between any other category of individual other than wars or riots. One is more likely to be killed by a member of his own family or her own family than by any other category of person. And therein lies the reason why we are here. As the mayor indicated, although crime is down, domestic violence is remaining the same or even increasing. Right now, my office has filed 90 felony strangulation cases, and we are on par to file 360 before the end of the year. And unfortunately, the sentencing for strangulation is one of the second and probably the second lowest level in terms of the sentencing guidelines. Just as we raised the crime of strangulation from a misdemeanor to a felony a couple of years ago, we have got to make sure that the sentences reflect the severity of the offense itself. And make no mistake, when someone strangles an intimate partner, they're 800% more likely to kill that person in the future. So right now, only so much we can do based upon my office and the mayor's office. We need the D.C. Council to start moving and take this seriously. Now, the mayor mentioned the points. Detention. Now, if there is a civil protective order and a misdemeanor assault, there is no hold. Now we're looking for legislation that allows a hold, that allows detention. If there is a prior domestic violence conviction against this same victim, there has to be a hold on the second time. If there are repeated protective orders more than one time, it's got to be a felony. And it's got to mandate jail time. And I am stunned to come here from New York and find out that if you assault a child or assault a spouse or a partner in front of a child, there is no separate crime. We've got to make that a crime, because there is no question that the consequences are long-term in terms of that child learning that violence is the only way to resolve conflict in their lives based upon what they are seeing between their parents or intimate partners. My office has created the VIPER, Victim Partner Emergency Response Team. And that VIPER system allows us as prosecutors to latch onto a case as soon as someone is in lockup with prosecutors, investigators, security analysts, as well as getting sworn statements and getting hospital records as quickly as possible so that we can solidify the case before there is any change going on. It is only with the help of the D.C. Council that we can make a difference for the victims who unfortunately are losing their lives to the person who once said that he loved them. I want to thank the agencies who are here today, and I want to again thank the mayor. There is still a lot of work to do, but we are certainly capable of fighting the fight on behalf of those who cannot do it themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Yep.
Chief.
All right. Thank you, Judge Pirro. Good morning. I'm Jeff Carroll, the Interim Chief of Police at the Metropolitan Police Department. First, I want to thank the Mayor for inviting me here today to speak about this very important topic. Like everything in public safety, fighting domestic violence takes a multi-agency approach. I'm glad to be here this morning surrounded by our partners and the support groups that are uplifting survivors every day. Sadly, the need for this legislation has become even more apparent this year. In February, a repeat domestic offender fatally shot the mother of his child in the Glover Park neighborhood. That suspect fled the scene with their child before taking his own life. Thankfully, that child was located unharmed. And just this past Tuesday night, a suspect shot and wounded his former girlfriend and another man before taking his own life. In 25% of all homicides that have occurred this year, there has been a domestic relationship between the decedent and the offender. And although violent crime is down, domestic offenses are fueling an increase in assault with dangerous weapons, which are up 36%. The legislation announced today will help to strengthen enforcement of court orders by increasing the penalties for violating stay-away and no-contact orders, both pre-trial and post-conviction. It will modernize D.C.'s kidnapping statute and create a felony unlawful entry charge. It also creates new charges, as the judge mentioned, for offenses committed in the presence of children. This legislation will update disclosure rules applied on our department, allowing us to better conceal the names of those who report domestic offenses. And in addition to the legislative steps outlined by the mayor, the Metropolitan Police Department is redoubling our efforts to spread awareness of the resources available to D.C. residents. Today we're announcing our No DV campaign, which you can see on the posters right here behind me. We want every resident to know the signs of domestic violence and know the resources that are available to survivors. And the message to the survivors is clear: know that you are not alone. Over the last month, our victim service specialists have deployed to over 20 locations across the city where we've seen repeat calls for service related to domestic disturbances. Our team and our partners at the Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants will continue to work to distribute resources and connect survivors with services. In addition to our No DV campaign, I want the survivors to know that our detectives are hard at work with their partners at the United States Attorney's Office to hold offenders accountable. And we want anyone listening today who needs assistance to call the DC Victim Helpline at 844-4HELP-DC. Again, that's 844-4HELP-DC. This hotline is available to anyone in need of assistance 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Natalie Otero from DC Safe.
Sorry, I'm very short. Hello. DC Safe has been at the front line of domestic violence in the city for 20 years. We've seen what happens when systems move too slowly and what it costs survivors when patterns of violence go unaddressed. We have been advocating for protections like this for over a decade. We know that when people are at high risk, every second counts. With the recent murders of Dr. Serena Fairfax, Shaniqua Elkins, Nancy Mateer-Bowen, and Devontae Curtis, the general public once again has been witness to the devastation that intimate partner violence can cause. It is pervasive and exists across socioeconomic lines and across every neighborhood, and it is our responsibility to solve it. The Protecting Victims Act of 2026 is a critical step in supporting survivors and saving lives. Doing right by victims is not a political statement, it is a matter of human dignity. DC Safe will continue to measure every step by one standard, whether it makes survivors safe. The toughest job we all have is still ahead of us. The survivors that we serve experience violence in multiple ways, and it is not an isolated incident. They experience it alongside housing instability, economic insecurity, immigration vulnerability, and systems that were not necessarily built for them. We must build systems that will not put victims at greater risk by coming forward. And we must remember that people who do harm also need a continuum of care to help prevent and break the cycle of violence permanently. This moment belongs to survivors and communities who refuse to stay silent. DC Safe has been a part of this fight, and we hope that this creates momentum to do even more in our community. I myself am a survivor and child witness of domestic violence, and I will continue to work for survivors' rights. There is more to be done, and DC Safe is here for it. We know that we know what still needs to happen, and so does every survivor in the city. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we'll be able to take a few questions. Let me acknowledge, too, that I'm joined by Deputy Mayor Lindsay Appiah, the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice, the Fire Chief, Chief Donnelly, and the DDOT Director, Sharon Kirschbaum. On topic. Yes.
You guys mentioned just the uptick that we're seeing in domestic cases. Is there any reason that you guys are aware of that we're seeing this uptick? Any trend with that specifically?
Chief.
Yeah, so domestic violence is one of the areas that we closely do watch to see how that trend is. And this trend is something that not only are we seeing here in the district, but we're also seeing in other places. You know, domestic violence can be one of the most challenging things because it does happen generally behind closed doors. And many times it takes a lot for a person to even call the police or make notification. There's a lot of factors that go into that. So as we are seeing an increase in domestic violence, we suspect there is, even more unreported crime. So that's why it's so important. And that's why today, with the announcement of our campaign, again, to get the message out and make sure folks are aware of those resources. So it's something that we'll continue to track and see, what effects we'll have with that. But it's not unique to the district. It is an area that we're seeing. And I think, some of the effects after COVID definitely play into that as well.
Yes.
This is a question for the judge. You had mentioned that you're looking for legislation that allows for pretrial detention if there's a prior domestic violence conviction. Does this legislation mandate that?
Well, the only thing that mandates it is if the D.C. Council passes it, and I believe that it is essential that this happen because, as I indicated with the strangulation, it's the repeated strangulations that we're seeing, it's repeated assaults that we're seeing, and at some point we have to take a stand as a society and say we're not going to accept this anymore. And I don't have anything to support this, but the fact that a man, and it's most likely a man, there's no question there are women as well, but the fact that a man can get away with it repeatedly, the fact that a man can actually assault a pregnant woman and there is no enhancement for the punishment of that assault on a pregnant woman, I think unfortunately, good catch, is a commentary that kind of, it emboldens these men to think that no one is going to stop them. And until we stop them, they're going to continue.
So to clarify, that would be just to clarify, that would be part of the proposed legislation?
Yes, absolutely.
And I should add that we are talking about the legislation. The legislation is drafted, and we will begin conversations with the council with my introduction to get a sense of a hearing schedule and how quickly this can move. Yes.
I apologize. We haven't been able to read, so I don't know if it's in there, but is the enhanced penalties for strangulation in this legislation, or is that in legislation that's pending before the council? Or
Deputy Mayor?
So if you recall, under Secure DC, one of the things that happened is that strangulation was made a felony. And so what Judge Pirro is talking about is that we need to work with the Sentencing Commission as well to make sure that the penalties, the sentencing guidelines, match the fact that this is now a penalty, and that in the district we are taking this maybe more seriously from a criminal perspective than in the past. So these go hand in hand. Secure DC making it a felony, and now working with the Sentencing Commission to make sure the penalties match, and legislation like this that also increases penalties for domestic violence.
So that the penalty can't be legislated?
It can't be legislated.
I appreciate that.
It's a sentencing guideline issue.
Judge, if I could follow up with you, you can't help but think about the Corey Mills incident when talking about domestic violence, and I'm just wondering from you and from the chief, one, if you had been USAO at the time, would you have gone forward with a warrant for his arrest, and would anything in this legislation make it easier for police to have filed charges that night?
First of all, I'm not intimately familiar with what happened with the Corey Mills situation. I was not the United States Attorney at the time. The only thing that I can tell you is I don't care who you are. You put your hands on a woman, we're going to arrest you. We're mandated to arrest you, and I'm going to prosecute you. And I can't be any clearer than to tell you that that would be the case.
Chief, can you kind of talk about the decisions that went on that night between your officer, what we've been reading in the Washington Post from the body-worn camera video that was released, why there were no charges that night, and then why seemingly your department wanted to change that the next day?
Yeah, so in that case, and as you mentioned, there's been some news reporting on that. There was information on the scene the officers had. In the video, you can see that a supervisor comes and there's a conversation that's had between the supervisor and the officer at that time, and that's when the decision was made not to file charges that night. The next day, as you mentioned, there was a warrant that was applied for and was ultimately declined. In that case, we also conducted an internal investigation to see if there's any issues on the part of the officers or the officials that are involved in that case.
What was it? Do you have findings from that internal?
I believe it's still ongoing. I'm not sure if it's completed yet.
Are you satisfied with the way that was handled?
I definitely think there's room for improvement from what we see there. As the judge said, anytime there's domestic violence, there can be a lot of nuances to that. But if there's probable cause to believe that there is domestic violence and a domestic offense has been made, then arrest should be made on the scene.
Did you look at Congressman's cuffs that night?
Again, I wasn't on the scene that night, but we're looking into the entire situation to see what happened. But if there's probable cause to believe that anyone, if a member of Congress or any person out here engaged inside a domestic offense, then they should be placed under arrest. That's my opinion.
Next question over here.
Hey, Mayor. I wanted to ask a question about some of the compounding factors that play in D.C. here. What you're talking about in this legislation is really punitive ways to address domestic violence and offenders. Something I've been hearing from advocates is concerns about the rising unemployment rate in the district, immigration enforcement, things that put stresses on families. Can you speak to if or what is being done to address some of those issues as well?
I think that the chief was exactly right in talking about we've seen a lot of very negative post-COVID impacts on families, on kids. We see it show up in our workers. We've seen it show up in any variety of statistics that we have. And sadly, we know, and we've seen it even in traffic fatalities and incidents all across the board, and not just in the district. So we are always looking for ways to strengthen and make sure our safety net is the most effective. And one thing that the chief talked about over the last several weeks, maybe at least a month, MPD has been very proactive in reaching out to families who have calls for service already for domestic violence, and making sure that we're doing very proactive outreach so those families know how to get the supports that they need. Director Porter's office, and I'll ask the director to talk about all of the various groups that she's working with and what we're finding.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. As mentioned, I'm the director of the D.C. Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants. We fund healing here in our city, and we're really proud to have over $110 million investment of supports for community-based nonprofits that include culturally specific, spiritually informed healing practices, from trauma-informed therapy to emergency and long-term housing, crisis support, and advocacy to help individuals to navigate what will be a lifelong healing journey. And so, as the chief mentioned, our one-stop shop to access all of those services is the DC Victim Helpline, 1-844-4HELP-DC. Each year, our office competes those funds, and we'll be opening up our consolidated RFA in the next few weeks with opportunities to us to expand opportunities to take on more community-based healing services to be able to fund to offer to our residents. Thank you, Mayor.
Focusing on strangulation, what are the sentences that people are receiving for it? What would you think is more appropriate? And given that it was a felony now, have we seen changes in those cases? Have they dropped? Have we seen some kind of fluctuation in terms of domestic violence cases?
Well, as was indicated, we took it from a misdemeanor to a felony, so automatically there is increased sentencing and enhancement. But the problem is that if there is not a mandatory hold, or if we're not able to ask for a hold, then the individual, doesn't have any deterrence, or doesn't feel any deterrence to not do it again. So until we get legislation like this that puts the victim in a situation where she is not confronted by him as the case is pending, or at least for a short period of time until we get our Viper, my violent intimate response team, going, then she is vulnerable, and she remains vulnerable, and he feels emboldened. It really is a societal culture that has led batterers to think that they can do this without consequence. And that's why it's so important, and I'm so grateful that you're all here today, because this affects your mothers and your sisters and your daughters, and your girlfriends, whatever, from a former boyfriend. The chief talked about it. We're seeing too many homicides. Strangulation is serious stuff. You strangle a woman, a couple years ago, it wasn't even a felony. So now we've got this cooperation, this enhanced reinforcement of our job with more resources put into it. So the defendants understand they're going to pay the price for this.
All right, last question.
Judge Pirro, if I could ask a question. You set up an office in 1975 when you were a prosecutor in Westchester County on domestic violence. So I do have a question. Is law enforcement and the judiciary system getting better? And then tied to strangulation, my understanding is in years past it was very difficult to prove forensically. Years ago in Prince George's County, they introduced in their hospital a scanner that could help prove that actually happened. Is that an element? Yes, yeah. Can you talk about that?
A couple of thoughts. Thank you for aging me. I appreciate it. But at the same time, I'll take a positive. I started the first domestic violence unit in the nation in 1978 when nobody thought this was a crime. Make no mistake. I mean, we have been moving forward, but there was a time when police would say, go to your mother's tonight and tell him to take a walk to cool off. It took a lot of lawsuits. It took a lot of victims. It took a lot of crusading to get this to where it is today. Have I seen an improvement? A bit, but it stuns me that in the District of Columbia that there is not a separate crime when a child witnesses the extreme violence that occurs between parents that may lead up to a homicide and there's not a separate crime for that. I mean, that's outrageous. This is learned behavior. The home becomes a place where that learned behavior spills out onto the streets, and we wonder why there's so much violence on the streets. So, with respect to your issue regarding strangulation, we are working with the Metropolitan Police Department. We are now looking to substantiate that there can be evidence, internal evidence, that you may not see physically on a victim, whether bruising is not evident or whether, there isn't any way to show bruising, that internally she has suffered tremendous trauma. She can suffer traumatic brain injury, which we hear about from our veterans coming back from wars and from fights. I mean, she is in a very bad situation. So we know this. The police are working with us. We've got cards for them to ask all the appropriate questions, because it's not as simple as, did he strangle you and you lost your breath? It's far more sophisticated than that. And they are willing to ask the questions that we need frozen in time to lock that prosecution in and get that defendant convicted.
Last question.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Okay. We'll go to just a quick round of off topic. Yep.
Yes. I see DDOT is here.
Yes.
If we can get some updates on the tunnel.
Sure.
Can you talk about the process of the inspection, how that all works, what kind of fixes are needed right now?
Sure. So let me just say, last night, and I want to thank our first responders, responded to a fire in one of our tunnels, 9th Street Tunnel, and it was a Metro bus. Chief Donnelly, of course, and his team at FEMS took control of the scene, put out the fire. Our Metro bus driver evacuated safely, and there have been no reports of injury. So we're very grateful to all of our first responders who acted very bravely and quickly. DDOT now has control of the tunnel to make sure that it is safe to use and to get us there. So Director Kirschbaum can provide the update.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm Sharon Kirschbaum. I am the Director of the District Department of Transportation. So the good news, the structure and steel beams are secure. There was no structural damage to the tunnel. There was, however, significant heat, and that meant that all of the tiles on the ceiling and the walls actually fell to the ground. So overnight, we cleared all of the debris, and there are still a number of tiles and elements of concrete that are loose, and we are focused on removing any of the hanging and loose concrete and tile to make sure that when we open it up, we don't have to worry about things falling on the vehicles. There was a large segment where all of the lights were damaged. So for about 150 feet around where the fire occurred, we are currently putting conduit in so we can get the lighting restored. The concrete or the asphalt underneath the fire also was damaged. We've patched that and we're putting down temporary striping. So good news is not a serious structural problem at all, but it is taking time to secure the area. We are hopeful that we can open it back up for the afternoon rush hour, and at some point we'll come back to do the full repairs. But again, the roadway will be cleared, the lighting will be restored, and all of the dangling debris will be removed.
Sorry. Going into that, can you talk about some of the fixes that are needed in addition to removing the debris?
Well, the good news, the ventilation system worked as it should, and we were able to clear all of the smoke out as quickly as one hoped. But restoring all of the tile face, the lighting, cameras, that can be done over time. So it's not considered an urgent repair, but it will be somewhat of a lift.
Okay. Question here?
That was it. So.
Okay. Last one? Okay. Very good. Thank you, everybody.